Right.
Right, it is 5 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome and thank you everyone for attending our mid-year budget hearing. We will start tonight with a review of the district budget as presented by Dr. Zadowski and Leah Theater.
Thanks, Rachel. And this is a practice that the school district's been doing for about 7 or 8 years now, and I think it's a nice opportunity to take a look at some of our budgeting trends. We do have the annual meeting each year in August, and much of the annual meeting is discussing what we anticipate budget numbers are going to look like for the coming year. But until we actually get our third Friday of September enrollment count, until we actually get evaluation certified from the state, and until we actually get state aid certified, it's very difficult to predict a budget. So one is we have that information now, but two is it also kind of gives us a chance to look at some of the long-term trends and to keep those in our minds as we move forward making decisions. A lot of decisions for the 2024-2025 school year will be made in the next several months. So like Rachel mentioned, Leah Theater, our Director of Business Services, she's done the lion's share of work on this presentation. It is in a very similar format to what we've used in previous years. Each year we seem to improve it a little bit and try to update the information and provide board members and community members an idea of what the budget looks like in our school district. So Leah, with that being said, if you want to just take it away, I'll chime in when I think it's appropriate, but go ahead.
Okay. As you all know, the school district of Menomonie has a long history of sound financial management, of balancing the budget each year and also planning for the future. As you know, school finances are impacted by many factors outside of our local district and community. Those factors include state laws and mandates, student enrollment, property values, capital expenses, grants, and then salaries and benefits, which take up the majority of our budget. Our major funding categories in the SDMA include our Fund 10 General Operating Fund. That is our largest fund. And the other ones are all funds set up specifically for designated areas like special education, referendum, long-term debt, capital improvements, and so on. The total budget across all of those funds for the 23-24 school year is projected to be roughly $66.5 million.
Leah, before we move forward, I know we already mentioned it to people in the audience, but for anybody watching at home, this whole presentation will be loaded into the district website tomorrow. So if you're taking notes, fine, but it will be available for your consumption on the district website.
Okay, key dates in the budgeting process. You know, we start out the year in August with our annual meeting. It kind of kicks off the year. The annual meeting and budget hearing. From there in September, we have our third Friday membership count, which is a very important count. We count on that for our revenue aids from the state and then also programming. In October, the state aid calculation is released and the board adopts the final budget and tax levy. In November, that levy is certified and sent out to the municipalities, to the clerks. In January, we have another membership count, and then we have our mid-year budget hearing like this. And in February, we begin the process of discussing next year's budget. It's an early preliminary budget estimate in February. We meet again in May and the board discusses the actual preliminary budget for next year. And then in June, you would approve that budget, preliminary budget, and so that we can schedule the annual meeting, and also so we can begin operating on July 1st. We have to have an approved budget in order to operate on July 1.
So just a few things to add on this slide. First of all, enrollment. Enrollment really drives the budget. And as enrollment changes, the budget changes, and it's really done automatically through the revenue limit worksheet and the revenue limit regulations. Also, this meeting is voluntary. This meeting is something that the school district puts on, unlike the annual meeting, which is required by statute. This is something that we think is best practice, and that's why we do it.
Okay, a little bit about Wisconsin school finance. We are in the first year of the Wisconsin biennial budget. So we know what we're receiving from the state. The revenue limit per pupil adjustment is $325 for this year and next year. The low revenue ceiling is set at $11,000. General state aid and school levy credits, the past 5-year overall average has increased about 3%. The per pupil aid remains the same as it had been in past years at $742 per pupil. And special education categorical aid, it's based on eligible estimated costs. So in 22-23, it increased up to 31.4%, and now here in 23-24 and 24-25, it's estimated to go up to approximately 33%.
Sure.
Well, the school levy credits, could you expand on that?
That is, that comes down from the state.
Is that levy to school districts or just?
I'll answer that. So the school levy credit is a vehicle that the state used, really started expanding several years ago. I think it was my first or second year as a superintendent when Elizabeth Burmaster was still the superintendent, state superintendent. Margaret, you probably remember, the budget in Madison got approved so late. I think that was the year that they put a lot of funds into the school levy credit. But unlike state aid, per pupil aid, the funds that go to the school levy credit are not spendable by the school at all. They just show up on the tax bill as a levy credit. So it doesn't impact our budget. Does that answer your question? Well, and we'll come back to questions as well, but a couple things to point out on this slide. Leah, were you finished? I mentioned in the previous slides, you can see everything here pretty much says per pupil, per student. So again, enrollment drives the budget. There are some things to celebrate, and we've been working really hard with our advocacy efforts, with the legislative process, the Joint Finance Committee. I know Amy, you pretty much always attend the Joint Finance Committee meetings. Margaret, I know I've seen you there as well, and others. But you know, we finally are starting to see some movement on the low revenue ceiling. And why that's important is because Menomonie, our revenue limit per pupil has been set so low, going back to 1992, 1993, compared to other schools, and then that gap has really widened, and we've talked a lot about that with our referendum planning, but it's still, it really has not been enough to deal with the inflationary issues that we're having, and also, you know, trying to replace the federal pandemic money, which we were left to operate on the last couple of years. But there has been some decent movement. The last comment I want to make is on the special education. We are glad there's some movement there, but that's not even close to enough. The mandated services that we need to provide, we have a multi-million-dollar transfer each year from the operating fund, Fund 10, into Fund 27, because the funding that we get for special ed services that are required by law does not come close to funding those services. So we hit on enrollment, you know, the last couple slides, and here's what it is. Leah, I'll just go here for a minute. So the history of enrollment, the last 5 years, you can see COVID really impacted 2020, 2021. But you can see enrollment that was fairly stable and actually was kind of in a slow growth pattern prior to COVID, you can see is actually starting to look, you know, stable to more of a potential slow decline. And when I move to the next slide, you'll see that as we take our current class numbers and we project those forward, we are anticipating a slight decline in enrollment. Now this is very difficult to predict. You know, some districts, they've done big population studies and studied birth rates, and no matter how you do it, it is very difficult to predict. There's so many different demographical factors that come into it. You know, we're monitoring the new housing developments in town. Certainly what happens with, you know, major employers can have a big impact on enrollment as well. But you can see that, you know, right around 3,300 students is where we expect enrollment to be in the state over the next 5 years in our school district. Any questions on that? Okay, go ahead, Leah.
Okay, this slide is the property values of our district over the past 5 years. As you can see, property values have been increasing. Last year and this year, values rose approximately 15%, 15 to 16. And we certified those, we received that certification each October 1st. We do anticipate a slight increase or stable for next year as well.
Any questions on property valuation?
And just to clarify my understanding, right, even when the property values increase, when the revenue limit is fixed, or whatever the revenue limit is, all that does really is adjust the mill rate. It doesn't actually bring in revenue.
Correct. Yeah, the property value helps us calculate what the levy is into the mill rate. But yeah, having a higher property rate, or property value, excuse me, does not give the district more dollars. In fact, it could end up hurting state aid because as you become a more property-rich school district, the percentage of funding you get from the state decreases a bit. And this kind of goes to what you were talking about with the mill rate.
Right, and you'll see here, in the last 5 years, our mill rate has declined. This year, we're at 5.69, which is 0.38 or 6.26% of the decrease over last year. The gray portion is our general operation or general fund portion of the levy. The red portion is our referendum approved debt service, and you'll see that red amount from year to year has fluctuated a bit. This year has decreased. And then the community services, that bright blue, a very small portion of the levy, and property tax chargebacks, the last couple of years have been zero, so that's not even showing up on the graph. Next, we have a regional tax rate comparison for this year. It's taking a look at all the districts, either in our conference or around this area. The average mill rate for comparison for the group is 6.81, and you'll see we're well underneath that at the 5.69. There's only 2 other districts, Colfax and Elkhorn, that is lower, has a lower mill rate than we do.
Any question on the regional mill rate comparison? The need has nothing to do with townships or counties or cities.
Correct. The voucher program impact on the SDMA. The cost of private school vouchers are added to the tax levy each year, to our tax levy, and then state aid is reduced by that amount for the additional tax levy. Here in Menomonie, we had 2 private schools participate this year in both the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program and the Special Needs Voucher Program for a total cost of $722,281. And then we have the cost breakdown there for the 2 different programs. There's a different rate for K-8 than for 9-12, grades 9-12, and then special needs voucher is a higher rate than those. DPI releases that official count on October 15th of each year. So prior to that, we estimate what our, what that impact would be until we get those final numbers.
Any questions on the voucher program impact?
Just for comparison, do you remember what last year's total cost was?
I believe it was around 586,000.
Okay, thank you.
Another interesting point is just to see how much per student the state set the voucher amount at. When you consider a revenue limit around $11,000 per student that we're allowed to generate in our school district, yet our levy is increased by $12,387 for any high school student that's involved in the voucher program.
This next slide is the history of our equalization aid, and you'll see over the past 5 years that has increased. And that, as we had mentioned earlier, as the general aid goes up, our tax levy goes down. And so it doesn't necessarily mean more revenue to the district. And then we also break down, there's 3 different levels of aid, and we receive aid at all 3 levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And that is the percentage of aid we receive in each of those categories.
As a school district, we've really tried hard to maximize state aid. We know that that's important to shift as much of the investment to the state as we can. And some of the things we've done in that is our planning with our post-employment benefit trust, also our capital improvement benefit trust, by making contributions to those trust funds in the budget year. Those are counted as aidable expenses. So even though those dollars aren't technically being expended on a particular item in that budget year, the fact that we are investing those dollars into those trust funds for future expenses allows us to count those as an aidable expense in the budget. That allows us to get more state aid the following year, since a big portion of your state aid is dependent on how much you spend in the year preceding that certification. Any questions on state aid?
Yeah.
Margaret?
Okay, so, if you put it in these funds, so it's aidable, well, if you don't put it in the fund and you use it the next year, for instance, is it aidable the following year?
Yeah, it could be if you put it in the fund balance. Essentially, you don't spend it. When you spend it in the future, it would become aidable at that point.
But that's what's in the back of my mind, at some point in time, it's going to be aidable, it's not like you do it now, you get it aidable and then you use it in the future. It's just the timing of when you get the aid.
Correct. Depending on what aid is in the future and what aid is currently, and there's a whole multitude of factors that play into it, but yes, you're correct. When you spend it, you get aid on it.
Here we're taking a look at our operating budget of revenue and expenses. The 22-23 actual revenues and expenses are shown there, and then our budget this year and the change. So basically, the change over revenues from last year to our budget this year is an increase of 8.42%, and expenses, we're looking at an increase of 12.06%. And that includes all the increases for salary and benefits and utilities, etc.
Any questions on this slide? Most expenses have been tracking around at 8%. Some things like transportation have been higher. I know Leah mentioned some things there, but yeah, inflation has definitely hit our school district, and I know it's hit everyone.
And then if we take a look at our fund balance, our general fund balance is sufficient for operational cash flow needs. So we've eliminated the need to short-term borrow. I'm going into my 8th year here. We have not had to short-term borrow. Prior to that, we did, because at that point in time, we were trying to build our fund balance up to that point where we didn't have to do that. And so the blue portion that you see there is our general fund 10 unassigned operating fund balance. And then the assigned in red is self-funded health insurance fund balance. And you'll see that that portion has gone down from 21, 22 to last year and this year. As you know, our health insurance costs have increased a great deal, and that has impacted this. And also, we have a reservation at the end of the fiscal year for expenses incurred but not reported yet, so that is factored in. And at the end of each fiscal year, during the audit process, we take a look at what those claims are that are incurred but not reported, and there's a formula we use to increase or decrease our fund balance. So all of that is taken into account during the audit process.
So Margaret and I were actually talking about this slide right before this meeting, and I think Leah did a good job explaining it, but I think it's also important to note, it was about a decade or so ago, Margaret reminded me, that there was some talk, some pressure, however you want to characterize it, at the state level about fund balance that institutions were carrying. And some people thought it might be a good idea to, essentially not provide funding and require organizations to spend down their fund balance. And while I understand some of the thinking behind that, it really is a double-edged sword, because not having a fund balance puts you in a position where you might not be able to make payroll. We certainly have changes every year in our school district, and we planned ahead, so I think we're in a very solid position. But the fund balance is critically important for maintaining our operations. And some people don't realize that we don't receive revenue on equal time throughout the year. We'll get a chunk, at certain portions, and having a reasonable fund balance is very important to manage the operations of the school district. The other thing too is that the revenue that's in the fund balance, that's one-time revenue. When you spend it, it's gone. So when we talk about many things in the school district, many things are annual expenses, especially when we're talking about our teaching staff, our other employment staff, services that we provide for kids. Most of those are ongoing services, they're ongoing expenses. So while it can be attractive sometimes to think about using fund balance to fund certain things like that, we really have to be careful, because it can turn into a fiscal cliff very carefully, or very quickly, I should say. Excuse me.
Before you go on, could I ask about that change of the assigned versus unassigned that happened last year?
Sure.
Just elaborate a little bit more on what kind of, just elaborate, please.
Yeah, really it's the auditors that provide the recommendation, I guess, or the direction in terms of how much of the fund balance needs to be categorized as assigned versus unassigned. And what happened with our health insurance plan, and the fact that we had a plan to spend down and such an increase in the cost, that really changed what had to be assigned versus unassigned.
So it's a recategorization in kind of that the dollars in that fund are more flexible. Where previously you said these red dollars must be spent for the health insurance fund, and now that is one of several things that could be spent for based on that change of the way it's being specified.
I think that's a good way to say it. Leah, would you have any?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And at that point, it's not as if there's not funding for the health insurance. It's just that it's more flexible in how you want to categorize it for auditing purposes.
Correct. Yeah, dollars collected specifically for health insurance have been spent on health insurance.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, our school district debt, the original referendum back in 2013 was finalized in 2015, and the debt payment schedule was set at that time. Over the years, we have taken advantage of refinancing opportunities to reduce future interest costs, and the SDMA has reduced those interest costs by more than $7.72 million over the life of this debt service that was incurred back then. So if you take a look at the current payment schedules in blue, we had those 3 high years where we paid down debt and refinanced to get lower interest rate. Then if you look out over the next years, you'll see the blue has gone down considerably, especially if you look way out into like 2030, 31. The bar graph in red is what our payments would have been prior to that refinancing. So you can see that we did reduce our interest costs considerably over the life of that referendum.
In the building referendum, which Leah mentioned, the financing plan was finalized in 2015. This graph starts before that because there was other long-term debt that the district had prior to that that has been paid off. Any questions on this, Margaret?
I appreciate if you expand on how the debt works. Like you have a referendum, and there's a referendum, but then we just borrow a lot of money, and it's taken care of at different times. So when is it aidable in the first place, and if so, when? Is it better when you spend it, or?
Yeah, you receive the aid on it when you make the payment.
When you make a payment on the debt?
Yes.
Okay. And Leah's nodding her head, so we know it's correct.
Okay.
Okay, Fund 46, Long-Term Capital Improvement Fund. There again, you'll see we have the history of the fund balance in this fund. We've been increasing our fund balance in this fund for many years. We're starting to spend those funds on capital improvement projects identified in the 30-year plan. That's why you'll see from 21-22 to 22-23, our fund balance has gone down. As we spend those funds, that will happen. I believe we started this fund back in maybe 14-15, and when that fund was first created, you could not spend out of that fund for the first 5 years. And so we had to build our fund balance up in there through 2020 before we could actually start spending those funds.
So every year, and actually tonight at the regular board meeting, the board is going to review the annual update to the capital improvement fund plan. We have a 30-year plan in the school district, and every year we continue to tweak the plan, make it more accurate, add things to the plan that we know are going to have to be addressed. But everything from boilers to building envelopes to roofs, all that stuff was in the original plan. And what happened a couple years ago is the technology infrastructure is something that we included in the plan because technology is here to stay. And that really made a difference in the plan. But I think people can feel very good about the fact that we're planning ahead for these expenses. So when we talk about capital referendums, my goal, I think the board's goal in the past and probably now is that, we want to plan ahead so that another capital referendum would not be needed for capital expenses on our current footprint. Now, that's not to say that if all of a sudden our enrollment exploded or there was a whole different approach to education that required different facilities or different equipment or something, that's not to say that a referendum couldn't somehow be possible in the future for capital expenses, but there's nothing that I know of or am anticipating anytime in the near future when it comes to that. And I think our planning ahead is something that really is something we can be proud of. Not many districts in the state have even a 10-year plan, much less a 30-year plan. And a lot of districts, what they do is they, let their facilities go, and then they, sell the roofs and the parking lots, and they sell those things in a referendum because people can see them so readily. That's not the case here. We're planning ahead in our current footprint. It's our goal to fund all the improvements needed into the long term.
And this slide is a breakdown of our Community Service Fund 80 tax levy over the past 5 years. You'll see this year we increased that levy. As costs have increased, we too have needed to increase the levy for this fund. The prior 2 years, we purposefully under levied that to spend down some of the surplus that was in fund balance in that fund.
Any questions on Fund 80?
Our post-employment benefit trust is kept in Fund 73. The district has a local post-employment benefit for most of our full-time employees. It includes health insurance premiums, contributions to an HRA account, and cash stipends, which goes into a 403B tax sheltered annuity. This past year, we did not have a full OPEB actuarial study. It's required every other year. This year was a table update, so we don't have all the information we would have in a year in which we have a full study, but our total OPEB pension liability as of June 2023 is down to 7.2 million. I believe it was just roughly over 9 million last year. The fund balance in the trust with no additional payment in July of 23 is at 6.2 million. And then the net OPEB and pension liability unfunded is at 942,000.
So we're in a really good position here with our post-employment benefits. We have transitioned really from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. And it's a long transition. It's not 100% complete, but we're in a very good position. And the actuarial study changes based on a number of factors, cost of the benefit and such. But this really is good news. This is really good. Again, not many districts have their post-employment benefits funded to the level that we do.
And this is a bar graph showing the benefits paid and then projected. This is the same graph we had in last year's presentation. Because we don't have that study available this year, we're not able to update this information. But we are right around 82 retirees in 22-23. 23-24, it's looking like 77 approximately. And again, the total paid out is estimates based on the study and not available until next year.
And Leah, the number of retirees, those are kind of like active retirees, I guess is how we could classify it.
Correct.
So that would be,
Still receiving benefits, either on our insurance, receiving an HRA payment or stipend payment.
so it doesn't seem that long ago, although time is flying. I remember back in 2014, anticipating what was going to happen to our budget and what was going to happen with the costs. And you can see we're kind of through that peak now. But I think that the different approaches the district took were effective in helping us mitigate this real financial challenge. Yes.
Okay, probably, you mentioned HRA and stipend payments. Are any retirees still receiving the health insurance with the adult Medicare or 65? Or none of that?
There still are some retirees on the plan. I believe there are just a handful that still qualify for that benefit that are still actively working. But those that are quickly maxing out age-wise. I believe they'll be 65 possibly before they even retire.
We're very close to the end of it.
Yep. Salary and benefits, that is the largest expenditure on the school district budget that I had mentioned earlier at 76%. We're very competitive with comparable school districts in our region and conference. We did have major changes to compensation for teachers back in 17, for hourly staff back in 18. We've also adjusted substitutes and extracurriculars back in 2019 to align with the needs and priorities of the district. Last year, our CPI increase, or I'm sorry, this year, our CPI increase was 8%. I'm planning next year's budget already, so I have that on my mind. And then staffing costs are increasing due to market factors, you know, inflation, employee shortages, et cetera. I know health insurance costs for us have been increasing, but changes that we have made to our self-funded plan have helped mitigate rapidly increasing health insurance costs over the years.
CPI for this next year is being projected around 4.5%, between 4 and 5, is that right, Leah?
Roughly, I have not, yeah, it's
I know it's
between
real
4
low.
and 5. I have not received the actual estimate yet. I expect it to come out this week.
It's definitely come down, but, you know, 2 or 3% is what we would have typically seen in most years, and we have several years that were under 2, so it's still tracking much higher than that, but I don't think it's going to be near that 8% mark. You know, we had a nice kind of setup where we were going to do kind of an every 3-year look at employee compensation, and we got through it before COVID, and then COVID hit and kind of threw a wrench into everything, and now we're facing this extreme teacher shortage. We continue to make improvements, continue to make changes, and I would like to see us get to the point where we can get back into a rotation. Capacity-wise, for HR and just the district as a whole, it's very difficult to really dive in and look at trends and look at needs and collaborate. You know, the collaboration is very important, but it takes time. So that's, I think, maybe a goal as the board starts thinking about work plan goals for future years. I think trying to come up with a predictable process, I think would be a good idea. But we are doing a good job with the salary and benefits, and I think now is a great time for that, especially with the shortage that we're facing.
Okay, this graph breaks down our health insurance costs a little bit more. The red bars are the cost of premiums, and you'll see this goes back to 2014-15 to present. There was approximately 6 years in the middle where premiums did not increase at all, and neither did the single or family premium amounts. As you know, last year and this year, we've had to increase those premiums due to higher costs. The single and family premium amounts listed on this slide are for the new high deductible base plan for employees.
So, for instance, in 2023, 2024, you can see the family plan says $2,566. The single plan is $871. And the reason why I'm not concerned about the red bar going above that is because we do have a number of employees that have elected not to be on the high deductible health plan, but then they're essentially funding the difference. So it'll be interesting to see how this graph shakes out in the next few years, but we're hopeful that the changes that we've made beginning in 2024 are going to restabilize our health insurance fund.
It might be worth knowing, those who weren't part of those discussions earlier in the fall, that if the plans had not changed, the increase would have been, remember, 18 or something percent, 19%?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, our grant funding for this year, we have the Margaret A. Cargill grant, and that total grant award is $165,000, and that runs through December of 2025. The Special Education Transition Incentive Grant, we were awarded this year at $22,466. We're also receiving from the state, the Get Kids Ahead initiative. That is a grant that spans over 2 years. It's last year and this year combined for a total of $109,264. We have what's what's left of the ESSER 3 funds from COVID-19, and that's at 2.8 million, and those funds will be spent down at the end of this school year. And then we have the letters reimbursement, that's also part of COVID-19 funds. For this year, that total grant award was $4,000. Then if we take a look at our federal grant funding, if we look at title grants first, we show the 4, Title 1 through 4, and then also Carl Perkins. You'll see for this year, all of them except for Title 4 have increased. Title 4 decreased slightly, but the percent change is the difference between all 5 years. So overall, Title 1 has gone down slightly, same with Title 2. Title 3's remained about the same. Title 4 funding has decreased slightly as well, and then Carl Perkins has actually increased some. And then the federal IDEA, or special education funding, we have the breakdown there for all the years what we received. And again, this year, both flow-through and preschool special education funds have increased, but overall, flow-through's gone up about 2% in the last 5 years, and preschool's actually gone down about 3%.
So Leah, I can take this slide if you'd like, and I want to make sure we leave, I know we've taken questions along the way, but I want to leave time for any other questions. We're almost done. But as you know, this year's a big year. We talked about the crossroads at the annual meeting about how revenue is not met up with expenses. So the board did approve a resolution to go to referendum. So on February 20th, you all know there will be a referendum in the school district, an operational referendum for $4.2 million of recurring revenue. It'll be a one-time increase that continues into the future. You know, I think we all understand when we look at these projections, our district is in a good financial position based on all the situations that we've dealt with COVID and everything. But when we project into the future, major cuts, major changes to the good operations that we have will be needed without additional revenue. 82% of school districts in the state have already had to go to referendum. You know, so we're one of 18%, I guess, that is finally at this point. And just anecdotally, locally, River Falls is going to referendum on February 20th. I believe Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls are going to referendum in April. I believe New Richmond is going to referendum, although theirs might be capital. And now it sounds like Hudson is as well, most likely in November. So I think pretty much every school in our conference is in the same situation, and every day we get the school news sent to us and the headlines from across the state. I mean, it's a big majority of the schools that are having to go to referendum. And again, that comes because of the fact that the state did not include enough new revenue in this biennial budget to deal with high inflation and expiring pandemic funding. So I'm very proud of the fact that our school district has got out in front of this. I think we put a reasonable plan together. I think we got good communication from the community. And you know, our goal, my goal as a superintendent is to align our resources with the needs and expectations of our community. So depending on how the community votes and tells us what to do, that'll give us direction for moving forward. But it's local control for our community to decide what kind of schools we want to have in Menomonie going into the future. So we really appreciate your support. We really appreciate you taking the time. We took questions along the way, but are there any other final questions or comments? Sandy, go ahead.
Yes, I do have one. I have not seen any kind of a spreadsheet with all the criteria on how you arrived at the $4.2 million deficit that you're anticipating. And I am concerned at why it had to be placed on the February 20th ballot, considering that now that's the only thing that we will be voting for on February 20th and costing this community quite a large, substantial amount. Polls at least the last 10 years, and I know historically the February ballot, voting in the primaries in February are very low turnout as compared to the April elections. I would want to have seen where more of the community gets out, so you have an actual, look at what the community really feels. I have talked to a lot of my colleagues that are still learning or haven't even known about the referendum coming up. And I'm telling everybody that I meet in the community about it, because it is a concern of mine. I like to see things dealt in a fair and open, transparent manner. I come from 30 years of working at a university where when we had budget issues, I outlined what the needs were. We looked at what is the prioritization of how you're going to match that up with the criteria that you need to meet. And I haven't seen that, and that's a concern of mine. I am a little bit more technically oriented, and I had to work with self-supporting budgets for over 30 years. So it concerns me that I haven't seen that. Plus, I looked at, living here in the community, our taxes in Menomonie just went up a year ago. They went up another 4.6 to 7% this year. My father, which now I've inherited, property in the Red Cedar, they just had their taxes reevaluated, their property taxes. But of course, the last time that was done was 2008, and so now it was just done. I think there were 3 other townships that have had some reassessment that's gone on too this year. So it is a concern of mine. And can you tell me why it had to be on the February 20th? Why the only thing that I will be working at the polls to see with, voting on just this referendum and the cost to the community, especially when you're asking us to even supply more of our tax dollars to the school district.
Thank you for the question, Sandy. Much appreciated, and I really like what you said about being fair, open, and transparent. And I know that's something that we really tried to prioritize. We did a survey back in November, and that went out to all box holders. It also was, spread across social media. It was emailed to all families. We really had a very good response rate. The survey company, School Perceptions, in fact, said our response rate was quite high, where they wanted it for that survey. So we feel like that was a really good measure in terms of getting information out. We also created a referendum guide that's been shared, and we have a whole section on our school district website. But I agree, anytime we go to referendum, it's important to get information out. I think we have around 24 different presentations. I know Dale and I were at the Lions Club on Wednesday. We have, I think, 2 of them tomorrow, one at Oakland Elementary that the public's invited to, and then one at the high school. There's one at the middle school on Thursday. There's going to be a community conversations presentation on Saturday at the library. So that there's a lot of information that needs to go out and is going out over the next month. In terms of why February 20th, that's a really good question, and I know the board talked a lot about that during these discussions, and I don't know if you've had a chance to follow along, but many of the decisions that need to be made for the 2024-2025 school year need to be made soon. And if we don't know, in February, if we were to push it off till April or next November, it really makes it difficult to plan, and it really can interrupt operations, and really it can damage operations too. I understand what you're saying about the cost of the referendum, but when you look at the actual overall impact of this referendum, I think the cost of the actual election is fairly minimal when you consider how big of an impact this is going to have. I actually think having it be on the ballot as its only item really can, in some cases, give it better attention, and people can really think about how they want to vote and whether or not they want to vote. But your point's well taken. I appreciate the questions, and I guess that's what I have for an answer. We are running out of time. Are there maybe one last, any short questions? Otherwise, I'd be happy to meet with anybody after the meeting. Okay, go ahead, Margaret.
Well, we had up to 3 scenarios based on what the budget's finally going to be. Because sometimes you're making a budget before you even know. This year we already know for 325. I believe that the major reason for doing it in February is to suppress the vote, because you can have 2 scenarios.
Okay.
My opinion.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the comments.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Sandy actually had two parts. And the first one was how we got to 4.2 million.
Thank you, Dominique, and I wrote a note, but I got along on the other one. So why 4.2 million? First of all, if we go back a couple slides, the ESSER slide, with our grant, you can see ESSER 3, $2.8 million is coming out of the budget because that federal pandemic money is gone. It's expired. So we're already starting with a $2.8 million hole. And then you look at all the increases with inflation, we're anticipating 4 or 5%. It really comes out pretty clearly. I mean, if I had, if I was king of the world and could do whatever I wanted, I actually would like the referendum more around 6 or 7 million a year, put us up to the state average. The $4.2 million doesn't even get our per pupil revenue up to the state average, but it does get us a lot closer to the state average compared to where we are now. So again, if we wanted to be at state average, it'd be closer to $6 million. I think the 4.2 million is much more affordable, and that's one thing we heard from the surveys, is affordability was a concern for people. And the survey projection had the cost at over $100 per 100,000 of valuation through the budget process, and once we got this year's information, it actually dropped the cost to $82 per 100,000, which we felt was much more affordable compared to the over 100. So I think $4.2 million is an amount that gets us to where we can continue with our current programming while still trying to consider affordability for community members. Thanks, Dominique.
All right, thanks for the questions. I'll just remind everybody, we do have a regular board meeting coming up immediately on the heels of that, and folks are welcome to submit a form to speak during those community comments. Given that, we'll call for action to adjourn.
Adjourn the budget meeting.
To adjourn the budget hearing.
And call it.
Okay. So,
Second.